All right, so in this video, we are going to cover the first two wars of German unification. So there are a series of three wars of German unification. We're going to cover the first two here, and then we're going to cover the third one, which is the biggest one of these wars, in a subsequent video by itself, and talk about some of the effects of that war in a separate video. So these first two wars are the German-Danish War in 1864. And the second one is the Austro-Prussian War, and that is in 1866. So those are the first two wars of German unification, and that's what we're going to cover in this video. So if you remember to our last video on German unification, Bismarck is now the Chancellor of Prussia. Essentially, he's the Prime Minister. And after watching Italy unify and seeing the failures of 1848, Bismarck realizes that to protect Prussia, Prussia needs to be bigger. Essentially, they need a big suit of armor made of little Germanys. And that's what Bismarck is going to try to do. He's going to try to unify Germany to protect Prussia. So he's going to use nationalism, German nationalism, to make Prussia stronger and safer. Now, this happens through a series of wars, and we'll start with the first one. The first war is the German-Danish War. Okay, so we're going to have to go a little bit into the weeds on this one, but it's important to understand why the war takes place and why it's fought the way it's fought. So we're going to need to do a little bit of digging on this one, but it's important. Now, the point of this war is that Bismarck needs to isolate Austria to keep the other little Germanys from wanting to unify around them. So he needs to keep Austria out. Austria cannot be a viable source of aid to the other little Germanys. They need to see Prussia as the only Germany that could protect them. So the German-Danish War starts in Denmark. Okay, so here's where we're going to get into the weeds a little bit. So in Denmark, Denmark has a province called Schleswig-Holstein. And I am not going to be writing that, so I'm going to abbreviate this SH. Okay, so Schleswig-Holstein. Now, this is actually a province that's in two pieces. There's a piece called Schleswig and a piece called Holstein. And this is right on the border with Prussia. So Denmark and Prussia share a border, and Schleswig-Holstein is right on the border with Prussia. The northern part, Schleswig, was mostly Danish, and Holstein was mostly German. And right now, the modern border between the two is the border between Germany and Denmark today. So Schleswig is still Danish. Holstein is now one of the northern pieces of modern Germany. Now, here's where things get a little bit detailed and out in the weeds, but bear with me. The two pieces were held in what's called personal union with the King of Denmark. Meaning that Schleswig and Holstein were not technically part of Denmark. In Schleswig, he was the King of Denmark. In Holstein, he was the Duke of Holstein. But the same guy held both titles. So the same guy held both titles, and so it was all part of the same kingdom. Kind of like how when Charles and James were made king of England, he was king of both Scotland and England. It's the same thing here. King of Denmark and like Duke of Holstein. The problem was when the king died without any children, the succession of both pieces went in different directions. So the King of Denmark would hold on to Schleswig, and the Duke of Holstein went somewhere else. And so that would break up this union. And this is where Bismarck saw an opportunity. So Bismarck saw an opportunity to draw the Austrians into a trap. So here's what they did. Bismarck asks the Austrians if they would like to work together to gain some German territory and incorporate more Germans into the Confederation. And the Austrians, who had been in a bit of a losing streak, agree. And this was not really even close. Denmark lasted about 3 months against the combined Prussian-Austrian military. And then they finally surrendered. And Prussia and Austria get both Schleswig and Holstein. Now, so far, the plan is working exactly as it was supposed to. Here is where the trap is laid. Bismarck asks Austria to jointly administer this new territory. One of them would get one piece, the other would get the other piece. And really what Bismarck is doing is tying Austria up with a lot of red tape and rules, looking for Austria to violate one of these rules. But so far, Austria does not notice that there's anything going on, and they agree to this setup. All right, so they jointly administer these new territories for about 1.5 years. And then we get the second war, the Austro-Prussian War. So this happens in 1866. The setup to this is that Prussia finds a technical fault by Austria. They do a minor thing wrong, and Prussia calls them out on it because they've been on the lookout for things that Austria is going to do wrong in this bureaucratic maze that Bismarck has set up in administering Schleswig and Holstein. And Bismarck resists any efforts by Austria to peacefully rectify the situation. So Austria is like, yeah, we understand we did something wrong. Don't worry about it. We'll fix it. And Bismarck is like, no. This is much bigger than that. I'm going to have to think about what you're going to have to do to fix this situation. And so Bismarck purposefully rejects anything that Austria tries to do to peacefully rectify the situation. Austria acknowledges that they're wrong, but Bismarck won't let it go. So finally, Austria goes to the German Confederation itself to help. And this was an actual treaty violation. Like, this was an act of aggression because now Austria is trying to bring in all the other little Germanies to do something to Prussia. This is the equivalent of a parking ticket versus like stealing a car. So now Prussia can declare war on Austria as the victim of an act of aggression. Because remember, Austria is now asking all the other little Germanies to help Austria fight back against Prussia. And so Prussia now sees this as an act of war, and they can now be the victim of an act of aggression caused by Austria. So at this point, Bismarck probably illegally dissolves the German Confederation. And convinces all the other great powers to stay out. And it really wasn't that hard. The UK didn't want to in the first place. Bismarck was friends with the Tsar and just said, hey, let us take care of this. And the Tsar was like, cool. And France is off doing its own weird thing. Not really paying attention. And we'll hit that weird thing here at the end of this video because it's interesting and it does kind of set up what's going to happen in the next video. So Bismarck has isolated Austria. Nobody is really getting involved to help them. And so now Austria and Prussia can finally have this war that's been building for quite a while. The war didn't last long. It was about 7 weeks, so a little less than 2 months. Austria and its allies, which were pretty much just some other little Germanys, were quickly defeated. And here's what happens as a result of their defeat. Prussia gets sole control of Schleswig and Holstein, which they really didn't care that much about, but it's a nice little benefit. Italy gets Venice, which was not part of Italian unification, but now that Austria is beaten, Italy helped Prussia, and Italy gets Venice. Austria is forbidden from joining whatever German unification Bismarck is planning. And Austria's allies are annexed into Prussia. So any little Germany that was siding with Austria is now forcibly added to Prussia. And just in case you're curious, places like Saxony, which was where Martin Luther hid during the Reformation, Saxony is now made part of Prussia. Also, Hanover, which is where all the German kings of Great Britain came from. So these are now parts of Prussia. The other thing that happens is that the German Confederation is now reformed as the Northern German Confederation. The only little Germanys left are in the southern part, and the biggest one of them left is Bavaria. Now, at this point, Bismarck is quick to make peace with Austria. There's no sense in having someone with hurt feelings right on your doorstep, so Bismarck makes peace quickly with Austria. And Austria had bigger problems. Most notably the Hungarians, who we've mentioned in a previous video. So the Hungarians and the Austrians have business to take care of. So Bismarck lets the Austrians deal with that problem on their own, and Bismarck doesn't really care. Now, at this point, France is starting to act kind of weird. And remember, Napoleon III is still in charge. And Napoleon III has, I guess we would call them, delusions of grandeur. So Napoleon III does something really dumb. He writes down a proposal for France and what I'm going to start to call Germany to divide up Belgium. And it's important to note that he writes this down and officially submits it to Bismarck. Belgium was officially neutral and a close ally of Great Britain. Remember, the new king of Belgium was the son-in-law of the king of England, or the king of Great Britain, and there was a very close relationship between those two countries. In fact, Belgian neutrality is what drew Great Britain into World War I. So this means a lot to the British. Bismarck rejects this, but keeps it in his back pocket just in case. ... And we'll cover that in the next video. The other weird thing that France is doing at this time is that France is trying to recreate their North American empire. Now, we're going to take a quick trip across the Atlantic to Mexico. So, since independence, in the 1820s or the 1830s, depending on who you ask, Mexico went into a lot of debt trying to industrialize. And in the 1860s, the UK, Spain, and France invaded Mexico to get their money back. Now, they had all agreed, or at least it seemed like they had all agreed, that they were just going to scare the Mexicans. France, however, France secretly was planning to take over. And Spain and Great Britain wanted no part of that. Spain and the United Kingdom left when France made it clear that they were going to try to take over. And they left with, a loan repayment plan, which is really all they wanted. But France actually takes over. And the reason that France was actually able to take over and nobody really stopped them is that this was happening during the American Civil War. And the Americans were kind of busy and not really paying attention to what France was doing. As soon as the war was over, the Americans politely, and I'll put that in quotation marks, asked the French to leave. Which they did. But, and this is the saddest part of the story, the Emperor of Mexico, who the French had put in place, his name was Maximilian I, was executed and the Mexicans take back over. Now, Maximilian is an interesting figure. Maximilian was this Austrian prince that the French said, we need you to go be the Emperor of Mexico. A lot of people had declined the offer, but Maximilian was like, yeah, that sounds good. And he and his wife and his family went to Mexico. And so this was from 1861 to 1867. And so during that time, Maximilian actually did his best to run Mexico for the Mexicans. He learned Spanish. He did what he could to help with the repayments. And he was genuinely a nice guy. And when the French forces backing him up were finally defeated by the Mexicans, he was arrested, and they told him, look, we are going to have to execute you because it can't look like we're being pushed around by Europeans. And Maximilian was like, oh yeah, I get it. No hard feelings. I understand completely. And, you know, from all accounts I've read, he was a very, very nice, pleasant man to be around, but he had to be executed for Mexican independence. And this is the weird stuff that France was doing, and France is going to end up paying for it in our next video when Prussia is going to declare war on France. So, until then, this is Mr. Nissen signing off.